Hi, everyone. We're going to give people a minute to trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, 3 Predictions for the U.S. Tax Market in 2018. Our speakers today are Adam Golden, Gareth Davies, Stephanie Gilmartin, Peggy Cross, and Natalie Santiago. They will be going over a review of our 2017 predictions for the U.S. tax market, the 3 major predictions for this year, and then we'll end with a Q&A. So throughout the webinar, we encourage you to submit your questions through the chat box. Also, I did want to note that all registrants will be receiving the recording as well as the slide deck after the presentation. So on that note, I will hand it off to Natalie to kick off the 2017 review.
Thanks, Shannon. Peggy and I will be recapping how our predictions for 2017 have panned out. I'll be covering the topics pertaining to the perfect storm, new outsourcing models, and 2017 being a candidate-driven market, while Peggy will be covering whether our predictions regarding demand for non-tax technical skill sets, as well as demand for transfer pricing candidates came to fruition. In last year's report, we predicted that 3 elements, tax reform, new rules and regulations from MGOs, and a demographic shift would create what we call the perfect storm that would entail major changes in the tax market. However, with tax reform being passed a little later than we expected, this caused a delay in these major changes occurring all at one time. So we didn't see the perfect storm hit the tax world in 2017, just as we predicted. Last year, we also questioned whether the PwC-GE outsourcing arrangement would start a trend or if it would remain more of a one-off situation. Although PwC has gained more middle market clients, as well as clients that don't have fully built out tax departments, we've not yet seen definitive proof of major outsourcing situations similar to the GE model at this stage. And lastly, as we predicted in 2017, we definitely saw this year being a candidate-driven market, even more so than in 2016. Basically, this means there was a higher demand for high-level tax professionals than there were candidates to fill those open positions. We've started to see an increase in baby boomers retiring without setting significant succession planning, as well as increased pressure on compensation, resulting in a lot of companies experiencing unexpected turnover. Both of these factors have helped to fuel this candidate-driven market, and as a recruiting firm ourselves, it's become pretty difficult to find high-quality candidates due to many of these different factors. Peggy, turning the remainder over to you.
Thank you, Natalie. So covering the last 2 bullet points we have here, the demand for non-technical skill sets, we have seen a huge increase in demand for tax professionals with the non-technical skills, especially the need for communication skills. In 2016, this trend started to take off, and it hasn't shown any signs of slowing down. Great communication skills are key in tax careers now across all levels, not just at the senior level positions. And the last bullet for the demand for transfer pricing candidates, transfer pricing roles started to have an uptick in the market mid-year of 2016 and continued to rise throughout 2017 as we predicted they would. This was due to the new rules and regulations from OECD, BEPS, and the non-U.S. audit pressures. As a firm, we worked on the largest number of transfer pricing roles in 2017 than ever before. That wraps up our review of 2017. We will now turn our attention to the 3 hot topics we predict will be the focus of 2018, which are demographics, tax reform, and technology. In this section of our webinar, you will hear from Adam Golden, Stephanie Gilmartin, and Gareth Davies. To get us started, Adam will cover demographics. Adam, the floor is yours.
I appreciate that, Peggy. Yeah, as Natalie indicated, we did see some baby boomers begin to retire last year. We did not see the major demographic shift take place. We are certainly feeling the effects early in 2018 of baby boomers deciding that they are going to retire. We've been predicting for years that there was going to be an acceleration, and we're certainly feeling it this year. The strong economy, we believe, is certainly part of that reason. I've also been hearing quite a bit from boomers that I've been talking to that just the complexity of the environment, the desire to want to learn a new, tax system, if you will, and the complexities that come along with that are just leading the boomers to decide that it's just not fun anymore to certainly to be in the lead tax positions. I can name off, there's several very large companies that have heads of tax that are retiring that we've heard already through the first quarter of this year. There are opportunities and challenges with each of the demographics. I'm going to go through some of those here for each of them. On the boomer side of the fence, although there's a number of them retiring, I would also state that I think at no other point really in history for a tax professional, the age of the baby boomers, would they have the opportunity to be in permanent positions and get hired in new permanent positions. Generations before them at their age just didn't have the kind of opportunities that baby boomers are going to have. I've got lots of companies that are open to bringing in baby boomers as bridges to the generation behind where there isn't succession planning in place already, or a company has a younger staff that are 4 or 5 years away from being able to step into a leadership position, and they need somebody to kind of help bridge that gap. And boomers are definitely being recruited and placed in positions like that. And boomers that do decide to retire are going to have opportunities to boomerang back into the tax field as independent contracting. That area for us has picked up greatly, and I don't see any signs. We haven't seen any signs of that slowing down, and it's going to provide a large opportunity for boomers who still want to stay active but have decided they don't want to work on a permanent basis longer to be able to still contribute and feel like they have opportunities. Some of the challenges that the boomers are going to have lies in the succession planning space. As they begin to retire, they really are going to have to focus on making sure that they have a good succession plan in place, either by using bridges to the younger staff or going out and hiring someone that could take over for them in a short term before they end up retiring. You're going to hear a lot about technology through this webinar, particularly at the end with Gareth. The boomers are going to have to embrace new technologies. The technology area is moving at a rapid pace, and the boomers that are not embracing new technologies are certainly going to get left behind on that front. For the generation behind the boomers, Gen Xers, there's opportunities and challenges there as well. Certainly the opportunity to step up once the boomers retire is absolutely prevalent. Lots of Gen Xers have been kind of bottlenecked and waiting behind the boomers to retire, and they're going to get their shot once that actually takes place. We also believe that the Gen Xers are in a prime position because they are certainly entrenched in what I would call the old tax system, and are going to be working for a long time in what I would call the new tax system due to tax reform, and being able to bridge the gap between the two and explain to senior leadership how things were before and how they're going to be going forward once we finally figure all of that out is certainly an opportunity for the Gen Xers to shine and demonstrate their leadership and communication skills. And then that exposure to senior leadership is an opportunity for them to gain the trust that a lot of the boomers have before them have had with senior leadership that maybe these Gen Xers just haven't had the opportunity to demonstrate. On the challenge side of the fence, with that exposure is going to come the challenge of having to develop and demonstrate those soft skills. It's an area that tax inherently is not very good at when it comes to getting outside the technical area and communicating cross-functionally with leadership and gaining that confidence. The Gen Xers are certainly going to have to be on their game when it comes to that area. And they're also going to have to deal with succession planning on their end. As they move up into these positions that the boomers are going to vacate, they themselves are going to have to backfill their positions and going to have to create a succession plan. So succession planning doesn't just start at the top with the baby boomers. The Gen Xers are going to have to deal with that as well. And then the Gen Xers are going to have their own issues with technology. They're going, like the tax system, where they're entrenched in the old and going to be the bridge to the new. They're going to be working for a long time with these new technologies. So they not only have to embrace the current technologies, but also stay ahead of the curve on the emerging technologies and things like that as well. Behind the Gen Xers, we have the millennials. They are really kind of in an ideal place to take advantage of new legislation. This is going to be their opportunity to really shine and demonstrate their communication skills with senior leadership when many of them maybe haven't had the opportunity to do so. They also have an opportunity to really learn from and be mentored by these boomers. As I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of clients who are using boomers to help develop some of these millennials, and the millennials have a large opportunity to take advantage of the brain drain or take advantage of the boomers that are around before the brain drain happens. Their challenges are going to lie with developing the technology savviness that they're going to have to operate in the tax departments of the future, but also combining that with the soft skills. Millennials, a lot of people like to think that they'd rather text or rather use their social media apps than actually have conversations and things like that. They're going to have to bridge both of those. They're going to have to be technologically savvy, but also be able to communicate like the generations before them. They're going to have to deal with the long-term impacts of NGO influence and tax reform. And we believe we're just at the beginning stages of the influence that NGOs are going to have and how tax is going to change over time. So the millennials are going to have to deal with that as things continue to evolve. And then this group is going to be put to the test on their ability to blend their tax technical skills with the new technologies. One of the issues that we see is as technology starts to take away some of the responsibilities that entry-level millennials and then the Gen Z behind them would normally have, how are they going to develop that technical base that the generations before them were able to develop by doing some of that lower-level work? That's going to be a challenge that that the millennials are going to have to navigate and deal with. I mentioned Gen Z here on the right. This is a brand new generation that is just beginning to enter the workforce. They are, I think, the oldest of this generation graduated this past year of college, and they're just now getting into the workforce. It will be easy to group this generation in with the millennials. There are some subtle differences, like the Gen Zers have grown up with social media, where the millennials grew up in a time before we had Facebook and a lot of these social media issues. So their perspective on things are going to be different. It's too early for us to really know what their opportunities or challenges are going to be in the tax departments of the future, but we certainly need to recognize that there's going to be a difference between what we would call the millennials and this new generation that's entering the workforce. And I'd highly recommend you guys do some homework and research on some of the differences between the two. Stephanie, I think you're up next to talk about tax reform. I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, the 5,000-pound gorilla in the room, tax reform. We all know that the new tax reform is much more complicated than originally thought, and it's going to take years before we really fully understand the implications. There's many layers to the new rules, and we see different impacts for different companies, as I'm sure you all do as well. There's three primary companies to really think about. The first one is you have your U.S. domestic-only companies. Overall, these companies are coming out on top. The tax rules for them are generally more straightforward. The overall reduced corporate rate is going to make it much more attractive for them to increase their domestic assets through M&A transactions, divestitures, things like that. So they've got it pretty easy compared to the other two. The U.S. multinational companies are a different story. The rules for these companies are much more complex and in some cases very unclear, making them difficult to be applied given the relatively simple territorial taxation model that was initially envisioned by so many people. These include the GILTI, Global Intangible Low Taxed Income Provision, FDII, and BEAT. It's just, as I said before, it's too early to know the long-term impact, and it's likely going to be several years before we know it, especially for the global companies. But in the interim, the new changes are creating much more work, not less, again, as we originally thought and upper management may have thought. Lastly, you've got your foreign companies, and again, like the other two, the full impact on those entities is going to take time to assess. However, in the short term, we think the lower U.S. corporate tax rate could make it much easier for the foreign companies to really grow their U.S. business post-reform, particularly through M&A. So that'll be interesting to watch to see if that happens. So given that high-level review of tax reform, the big question that we're dealing with in our business is, how is this really going to affect your staffing needs? And we see it in two phases. The first phase, the transition tax issues, which are really going to cause more of your short-term staffing needs. And then the second phase is going to be more ongoing, long-term tax issues, which again are really unclear or staffing issues, which are unclear at this point. The one thing that's the common denominator is that upper management needs to understand that this is going to be an ongoing issue and be supportive of the heads of tax or the people hiring these strategic tax resources that are really going to navigate these uncertainties for you. So that constant communication is really going to be key. So the first phase, the short term, if you're a fiscal year end and you've already filed your taxes, your short-term staffing needs are probably not too critical. I mean, we don't believe there's going to be significant corrections to the new legislation this year due to it being an election year. However, your staffing needs, as I just discussed, will likely evolve over the next few years and become much clearer. The second phase, the long-term issues, are going to create these ongoing staffing needs for both permanent and contract. So you're going to have to look at both areas. And as we unravel these new rules, as I've said a few times, not to beat a dead horse, but it's just going to take years before we fully understand it. But you have to try to be on top of it as much as possible. Domestic companies are not going to be able to count on short-term reduction in headcount like they might have originally thought. So based on what happens this year, you may be able to combine some positions or maybe not hire new employees, but you're not going to be able to, really get rid of any positions that we can see. For global companies, we think there's going to be, as I mentioned, both a need for permanent and contract staffing immediately to help navigate these issues, and then long term. And as I said, they'll start to evolve and you'll start to figure out where your needs are really going to be. And then for the foreign companies, we see the need for permanent staff to be hired now again, just like the global companies, to really work through the new rules. And then, if they start to acquire more companies in the U.S., then that's going to even add more complication on it. So as I mentioned a minute ago, one of the most important steps you can really take now to be ready is to just continue that clear and constant communication with your C-level team, the CFO, controllership, finance, on what the current and ongoing impacts are going to be for your company as these corrections are made. This is so important for you to do this. Make sure that your C-level team understands that there's nothing simple about this, and that it's going to take years to figure out, and it's going to be constantly changing and evolving so that they're not surprised. You've got to be proactive. Don't let them be surprised, and then you don't get the head count that you need to navigate all of this. So that's really tax reform in a nutshell. Gareth is going to talk about, he's up next. He's going to talk about the really important part or area of new technologies that Adam covered some in his segment. So Gareth, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Steph. Much appreciated. So Steph said I'm going to focus on the technology area, and it seems like 2018 was the year of the hype. Firstly, with tax reform and also with technology. Unfortunately, tax reform has given us a few more answers than maybe what technology has. I think more than anything, we've probably got more questions than we have answers when it comes to the technology world. So in this area, I'm not really going to try and give you guys the answers too many, but really focus on some of the questions that you may be asking yourselves in your departments over the next kind of 1 to 2 years. So the first part of this is we saw kind of towards the end of last year, there was 2 main areas that tax departments were asking questions about and talking about. The first one was robotics process automation, or as you guys kind of talk about it as RPA. So this is that form of technology that allows you to automate processes, and it's always provided with instructions. The second is AI. And this, as you guys know, is kind of been the simulation of human intelligence. And if you think of the IBM's Watson, for example. And then one of the aspects of artificial intelligence that people are talking about is the machine learning side. And this is that science that allows computers to learn based on programmed algorithms. So as a result, computers can improve their learning over time and become increasingly better at identifying and predicting information. So they're the main areas that a lot of people have been talking about going in the end of last year and again coming into this year. But it's caused so many more questions. Or how do I implement this? What am I going to do with it? How can it benefit us? The one thing I would say at this time is don't put your head in the sand. These kind of areas, as they come up, you really have to be proactive. You've got to try and understand the new technology and understand the implications they're going to have on your tax department. I know with technology, among other things, people get scared of new technology and new processes, but with everything going on with reform and all these other areas of tax, we really need to be on top of something like this. So that leads to kind of what should you guys be focusing on, or where are you guys probably going to see most of your focus spent in the next 12 to 24 months when it comes to technology? And from what we've seen, it looks like RPAs and automation is going to be the big focus. This is where we're getting tons of calls from clients asking us about RPAs and automation and how that can be beneficial to their departments. That more than artificial intelligence. I think we'll see more AI over the next kind of 4, 5, 6 years. But right now, I think the RPA and automation is really where the focus is going to lie. The RPA is going to allow you to automate things like your sales and use tax returns, spreadsheet populations, and data manipulation. As I said, we're seeing a huge increase from clients asking us, hey, I'm thinking about how can we use RPA for our sales and use tax returns? How can we kind of bring this and make it more effective? We're seeing more tax individuals look at programs out there to kind of take that on as additional skill set. We've begun to, there's an RPA Academy, for example, that teaches people kind of the fundamentals and the basics of RPAs and how that can help them. So there's a lot of companies starting to see, okay, what else can we do? I've even seen clients start to shift people away from their tax roles specifically into global process and automation roles as well. And then they have to go back and kind of fill those roles at the same time. So RPA definitely looks like it's going to be that focus for this year. And then with that question, you're probably going to say, okay, well, with RPAs, what should I do? Should I build that function in-house ourselves? Or is this something that we should outsource to another company? And really, there's no right or wrong answer for this. And if you think about, if you're going to in-house, if you're going to build the function in-house, then you need to either hire tax technologists, or you're going to need to retrain your existing staff to build this new skill set, not just from the tax perspective, but the IT perspective as well. Once you've done that, you're going to have to think about how you maintain that robot. And then once you have that, you need to think, if I'm going to build this, should we be the first company out there to go and build this? We all know when you're the first to build it, sometimes there's a lot can go wrong. A lot of us kind of learn from other people's mistakes. So you may not necessarily want to be the first department, but you probably don't want to be the last. So that's why it's important not to put your head in the sand and kind of really keep up to date with everything that's going on out there. If you decide that, hey, we're going to outsource it and that's the way our department's going to go, then there's a whole bunch of questions that come up within that area. So do we go to kind of a consulting firm or the big four? Or do we even go to a specific IT consulting firm? Do we go to special taxologists to kind of help us, or to boutique firms? A company here, TaxForce, that focuses on independent tax professionals, they've seen a tremendous increase in companies calling, looking for talented consultants, not especially just do tax, but kind of start looking at how they can implement RPAs. So it's definitely an area that's kind of growing, and the companies are learning, hey, should we go in-house or outsource? And as I said, there's no right or wrong when it comes to that. The last thing I'll say kind of on tax technology is a lot of people get worried, hey, computers, they're going to take over all our jobs, and is this going to reduce headcount? And honestly, that's the kind of the big question that a lot of people are asking. But we honestly don't think that it's going to reduce headcount at all, not right now at least. It's really, as you think kind of with anywhere, when you start spending more money on technology, it allows you to actually focus on some of the more value-added work instead. So companies may start shifting some of that resources to look at more the tax planning world. Kind of allow you to kind of focus maybe on global process automation, and hey, maybe we should do more projects related to shareholder value. So we don't see it taking away headcount, but it may allow you to kind of use that resources in other areas instead. I always use the example of kind of, you think of recruiters many years ago when they first started. A lot of recruiters had the yellow pages, they had a phone, and that was pretty much all they needed. So their costs were very minimal. But as companies have built CRMs, the Salesforces of the world, and kind of other technology to help them keep up to date with everything going on, they don't necessarily lose headcount, but they end up kind of having to hire more people to help run these functions as well at the same time. If any of you on here are lucky enough to catch the webinar we did, the AI webinar earlier, that was kind of great in kind of going into a little bit more detail about kind of the AI world and kind of what we see coming up. And if you weren't able to catch that one, you guys, it's not too late. We still have it available that you can always check it out. So that's kind of all my side on technology. Shannon, I think back over to you.
Thank you, Gareth. At this point, we'll use the rest of the time to answer everyone's questions. If you haven't done so already, please submit your questions in the chat box. So our first question is, outside of communication, what other non-technical skill sets are you seeing a demand for in the market?
I'll take that one, Shannon. So outside of communication, what we're seeing is a push for project management. Some clients seem to be looking for this skill in candidates with 2 to 5 years of experience. Another skill that they seem to like is leadership. There are more and more companies wanting employees that possess leadership at the lower levels. And I also think that we'll start to see technology, as Gareth was talking about, impact the skill sets employers are looking for. As we continue down that path of tax reform and technology, the ability to adapt to change is going to be critical. Anyone else have anything that they're seeing?
No, I mean, I would echo what you're saying, Peggy, in terms of that ability to adapt to change. If you just kind of think about tax reform, you think about new technologies and kind of everything happening on that front. The common denominator to all of that is operating in an environment that's going to be constantly changing over the next several years. And I think that it's not necessarily a skill, but I think it's definitely a personality trait, the ability to kind of operate in an environment where things are less certain and where there's some ambiguity, and trying to navigate a complex and changing environment is definitely something that my clients are talking about whenever we're talking about personality traits and things that they're looking for in candidates, for sure.
Okay, our next question is, what are your predictions for transfer pricing careers this year?
I can take a first blush at that one. I mean, I'm certainly hearing from my hiring authorities and clients that transfer pricing is still high on the list. I have not heard as many pure transfer pricing jobs as open through the first quarter of this year. Now, that could be just a byproduct of we're just, entering into what I would call the spring hiring season. So, for a lot of our calendar year-end companies, they're so focused on just getting through year-end and, right now, kind of in what I would call the triage phase of figuring out what tax reform means, that, I think companies are going to start getting to more of a proactive planning or figuring out what they're going to do from a proactive planning perspective going forward once they get their hands around tax reform. And I'm hearing that transfer pricing is certainly part of that. It's definitely being woven into some of the open jobs that we have on the international side of the fence in terms of overall responsibilities. Right now, I still think that transfer pricing is going to be a high priority. I don't know that I have or that we would have enough data to say that there's going to be an uptick the same or a downturn in pure transfer pricing jobs, but I'm certainly not hearing companies not talk about it. I don't know if that completely answers the question or not. Gareth, Stephanie, I don't know if you guys have any other perspective on that.
I was going to say I agree. I mean, I think this year is going to be just one of those years where, we're going to see how everything starts to shake out. As you said, companies with year end, they're just now getting through that. They've got their heads up now, and now they're continuing to deal with tax reform. So this year is going to be kind of an exploration year, I think, to figure out where the needs are really going to be hit. I mean, clear, like you said, everywhere I think we're going to have needs, but the real specific ones, it's still unclear.
Good question. Is there any others coming in?
Yep. Our next question is, why do you think the new PwC GE model has not become a trend?
I can take that one, Shannon. So I would say there's been an increased pressure on a lot of departments to really maximize a lot of their current internal resources, especially in light of recent tax reform. While it looks like PwC has definitely been trying to get this out there, it looks like a lot of companies might be, a few companies might be considering it, but haven't yet taken the plunge. So it's really too early to say whether it's going to remain a one-off situation or could become a trend. Additionally, just speaking with some people out of that PwC GE arrangement and people who are familiar with the situation, it does look like some of those individuals are getting split into different kinds of accounts outside of the GE. And some of those weren't necessarily looking to go back into a public accounting situation, having been on the corporate in-house side of the fence prior. Additionally, some companies, rather than going to completely outsourcing their departments to Big Four, have been sourcing a lot of that work out to different foreign countries, including India, to cut cost as well. So we have seen some companies going that route as an alternative to this kind of outsourcing arrangement. Does anybody else have anything that they think to contribute to that one?
No, I think I'd echo just kind of what you said. I think there's a lot of people that were at GE that maybe had come from professional services background, and now I think as they've been embedded for much longer, they are getting put on more and more accounts, and kind of their focus is becoming less and less just on GE, and that wasn't necessarily the career paths they were looking for. So I think that's definitely a lot that plays on companies' mind as they look to make that transition as well. So I think everything you said, I agree with.
The other thing that I might add to it that could be a factor, again, it's that arrangement only is still a recent development, and a lot of those decisions to do those things, companies don't enter into them lightly. So there could be companies that are still considering it right now that we just haven't heard about, or they're planning a version of it. I have heard of companies deciding to outsource chunks of their work, just not wholesale outsourcing of, a department like GE did. I have had more clients decide, hey, we only have X number of headcount. I'm going to use that headcount to do more of the value-added planning work or add more analytics to my tax accounting team and outsource the people who are doing or the work that is the compliance work, and then it forces the departments to have to figure out the skill set of the people that they have internally to determine whether or not the people that have been doing that compliance work can do some of that other value-added work. That's kind of a different, a different issue altogether. But we have not heard of the wholesale outsourcing, but I have heard of more companies looking at the firms to kind of take some of the lower level work so they can use their internal resources to do some of the more value added stuff, kind of like what they're doing with technology, like you talked about, Gareth. Shannon, we got any other questions?
Yep. Yeah, we got a few more. With everything going on in the tax world as far as the demographic shift, new technologies, and reform, does that mean hiring will be extra competitive this year?
I'll jump on that one, Shannon. I think we've touched on kind of hiring a little bit in each of these sections, but I think the short answer is yes. I think the market is going to be extremely competitive, and we've seen that already. You've got reform, technology, demographics, it's all having an impact on the market. But there's so many other things as well. I mean, Adam touched on the retirement side. We're seeing baby boomers retiring, so those individuals underneath them having to step up, and companies maybe don't even have individuals ready. So that's just one bucket. We're seeing a ton of acquisitions already this year. And we're seeing companies looking to spin off divisions already this year. We've had 3 or 4 large companies talking to us, and we're only still in the first quarter about relocating their entire tax departments as well. That's all on top of this normal hiring period. So when it comes to the spring, this is normally when the market upticks and gets busy anyway. So all of that is happening on top of your normal planned hiring at the same time. So then you've got a lot of turnover because people getting stolen away and recruited away. So I think the short answer is yes, it is definitely going to be a competitive market this year and continues to be a candidate-driven market, and not just on the permanent side, even on the contract side as well. I mean, we've even had some of our contractors who the Big Four have reached out to try and get them to come on board and help out on client projects. So I think across the board, it's going to continue to be competitive.
Yeah, the other factor you have into that, Gareth, is, I mean, at the end of the day, we have a captive labor pool here in the U.S. We can't import people from other countries to come in here and do U.S. taxes, right? So all of these things, the retirements, the spinoffs, the mergers, the hiring that takes place because of new regulations, all of this, there are more jobs than there are people, and when one person leaves, it kind of creates that ripple effect. So, I mean, certainly for the foreseeable future, I think that the market's going to continue to be very active. Almost every candidate I speak to, if they're actively looking, they have multiple irons in the fire. They've got multiple things they're looking at. So, yeah, if you're looking for a job, now is the great time to look for a job. If you're on the other side of the fence and you're trying to hang on to your people, certainly, you should be looking at your retention strategies and things that you might do to retain your people, because they are getting phone calls. And if you're hiring, I definitely would strike while the iron's hot. If you have a good candidate, don't dilly-dally around and look for a better candidate. If that person can do the job and matches your culture and meet your needs and wants, scoop them up, because they likely have other things that they're looking at for sure.
Next question is, do you have any perspective whether the trends in technology and automation will also be the priority for government and IRS?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't have any perspective on that, honestly. We do most of our work for corporate, and we talk a lot to people that are in the professional services firms. Unfortunately, we don't do as much on the government side of the fence. But here in just a minute, Shannon is going to put our email addresses up. Shoot one of us an email on that, and as we get more data on it, we can certainly make a note to get back to you. We just don't talk to that many people on the government side, but honestly, it's a question I haven't really asked a lot of folks, but I'm happy to get back to you and over the next, couple of weeks as I'm talking to people, ask and see if they have any perspective on it and report back to you.
Yeah, nothing I'd add there at all. I think you're right. We don't talk to enough of those people, but I think, as Adam said, reach out to us with those kind of questions, because these kind of things, I think that's at the forefront of what a lot of people are asking. So if we can kind of get to the bottom of that now, then, hey, that's great. So, yeah, I'd love to talk to more people about that offline as well.
Our next question is, as an employer, what's the best way to attract and retain candidates in this candidate-driven market?
I'll take a first stab at that one. That's a good question, and actually we could probably spend a whole hour answering it, because I do believe we've done previous webinars on that, but I'll give you my short answer here. To attract and retain candidates, you actually need three things. You need trust, development, and a retention plan. And under each one of these, there are actually layers, like listening to your employees, making sure you fully understand them, having honest conversations across the board. You also need a culture of development. I can tell you that the lack of development is probably the number one reason people leave, just from my conversations with candidates and the studies that we've performed here in the firm. And for your retention plan, make sure you have open communication there. Look at your culture. Ask yourself if it's one that promotes development. The last thing is to look at your compensation levels. Make sure your people are at market and that your top performers are being rewarded accordingly. I know I just scratched the surface on that particular question. Does anyone else have anything there to add?
Yeah, Peggy, I think those are all excellent points and definitely form the foundation for what a lot of these employers need to focus on. I might also add to that in order to be able to really ensure that you can provide the support in the development side of the fence, also important to make sure that you have the buy-in from financial leadership, and really be able to ensure that tax is supported within the organization. And if you have this, you can really help to create a culture that you can embed into the department, not only currently, but also in the future and moving forward.
And I would, the only thing I would add, go ahead, Gareth, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, that this is one of those things, as Peggy said, we could probably talk about for hours on end as well. And I know Adam and I were at a TI event where we actually spoke about this itself, and I don't think you can underplay just how critical this area really can be. If anyone wants to kind of dig into kind of more of this, we'd all be happy to kind of talk to them more. But I think this is probably one of the most critical areas in tax, and I think a lot of it starts with what Peggy said, and that's trust.
Yeah, we did a webinar on that last year. So if you're a TaxTalent member, you could access that through our TaxTalent website.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to add is I think you talk about recruitment and retention, and a lot of the same things kind of go hand in hand. If you have a culture of development, you're going to hang on to your people and retain them, but it also is a breeding ground. People want to come work for companies that do that too. So, one kind of feeds the other on that side of the fence. Specifically addressing recruitment, since this is a candidate-driven market, I would just stress, make sure you have all of your data about the market. Make sure when you go to market for your job, it's a job that you're offering competitive compensation, and you're in the market in terms of what you can attract for what you have to offer, and you adjust your candidate specs and your profile to what the market is. You may have to go down in expectations because it is ultra competitive right now, and if you have a job that's out of alignment, you can pretty much be prepared that your job will be open for a long time, or you're not going to get that A caliber person if you're not if you're looking for something that you're not able to afford, or you don't have, the job spec'd out with the candidate profile and what you have to offer that person. All three of those things have to be in alignment.
Our next question is, if RPA and AI do not reduce my headcount, what are the benefits to my company, both short-term and long-term?
That's a very good question. And I could see why people would ask that, because, hey, what's the point of us spending all this money on RPA and AI if it's not saving us money, it's not reducing headcount, and what is the benefit of that? And we kind of spoke in a lot of these sections, especially with technology, that we don't think it's going to reduce headcount at all. But I think the benefits of why it may not reduce headcounts is you then have the opportunity to focus on some more of the higher value work that you can focus on. So maybe you start focusing more on tax planning initiatives. Maybe it's the areas that improve shareholder value. In essence, I think I mentioned this earlier, you're just kind of reallocating resources. So even your consultant budget may change, where it had been focused maybe on the compliance and operations, but hey, your RPA is going to help you out on the compliance return. So you may not be spending as much on your consulting budget, or you may actually shift your consulting budget to be in some of these other areas. So while it's not going to reduce the headcount right now, I think the long-term benefits is where you're really going to add more value to the work that you're doing and the areas that you're kind of focusing in, instead of having so many people focus just on the data input and the compliance, maybe some of these other areas that can really add value and add shareholder value. So I could definitely see why someone would ask that question. I don't know if any other folks have anything to add to it.
No, I think you did a good job on that one. Just to me, it's a reallocation of resources, not necessarily a reduction, of resources or reducing the headcount. It's allowing you to use what you have, deployed in a more strategic and more value-added manner that adds shareholder value, hopefully.
We've got one more question and then we'll wrap up. Given all the ups and downs in the stock market recently, if there's a shift in the economy and we move into a recession, do you have any predictions on how hiring might be impacted?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that if we move into a slower economy, it's going to have an impact on hiring. Ultimately, I do think it'll slow down some. We've been talking about the boomers that are planning to retire and all of that. I still think the ones that are very close to retiring will still retire. There may be some that have been on the cusp that, may decide to postpone it until things turn around or rebound. I don't think tax departments in general are in a state where a lot of fat can be trimmed. I mean, budgets and things like that are, kind of cut to the bone already, and departments are stretched so thin. So my personal belief, that some of you guys can chime in here, is that I don't think we'll see a whole lot of wholesale layoffs or cuts in the majority of the corporate departments. There could probably be some isolated instances in some industries and things like that, but my feeling is I think those will be anomalies. I think with what Stephanie talked about, with all the new changes and things happening, I think that we feel like tax departments are going to be even more valued, not less valued. So I don't think that companies are really going to be in a position to do massive layoffs. I would imagine there could probably be some technology initiatives that may be put on hold, and that the spending on implementation could be delayed for now until things come back or whatnot. But again, I think that would be a temporary pause, not a wholesale decision to just not do anything at all. The professional service firms tend to always cut their resources more than the corporates do. They also tend to cut them later, when the company's consulting budgets dry up. So I think you'll probably see and hear more cuts along those lines as companies rely more on their internal staff to do more of the work. But I think the corporate tax teams will be okay, but we'll certainly see a slowdown in new jobs, and I think some of the retirement talk will slow down some. Does anybody else have any perspective on it?
I was just going to add, Adam, I think that as a whole, as you know, our firm's been doing this over 35 years now, and historically we've seen downturns in the economy, and you know, taxes has always been somewhat insulated from that, and I don't think now is it really any different. I think you'll find most of the companies that view tax as a profit center versus a cost center are going to be the tax department in those companies are going to be the last to be affected. So like Adam said, there's anomalies out there, but as a whole, I don't think there's going to be a huge difference.
Adam, I think one of the things that you touched on is kind of how a lot of the departments out there are pretty thin. There's not a lot of fat to them, and I think we're seeing this kind of more than ever right now as people being asked to do more with less. And so I think, as Adam said, I don't think that we'll see a huge slowdown. We obviously would see some kind of slowdown, but I think it'd be more companies, there'll be less acquisitions. The idea to spin off divisions may kind of stop, or at least slow down. Companies looking to relocate, that may kind of be put on hold as well. So I think some of those bigger initiatives that are driving a lot of the staffing right now could slow down, which could cause some of the staffing to slow down. But there's still a lot of, as Adam said, the retirements going on. There's the normal hiring. And then if that's the case, I think you'll probably see an increase in kind of using consulting budgets more than anything.
Good question.
So we'll wrap it up. So thank you everyone for attending today, and also thank you to our speakers for taking the time out of their day to present. If anyone would like to continue the conversation with one of our consultants, you're more than welcome to email or call them. I'll make sure everyone gets these slides as well as the recording, so you'll have all their contact information. But thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon.